I love how you call yourself political non-binary. And I completely agree with that because people like to label me also as, oh, you're so political. I'm like, no, I'm actually on the side of truth, right? I'm on the side of common sense. And I think, we're living in this era where people are really forced to choose one side or the other side and not actually allow ourselves to think through ideas. And when I think about your childhood, growing up really under this shadow of communism and your parent being raised by people who really lived under this shadow of communism, I can't help but think that is that what inoculated you? Like, did that help you develop discernment? Because there is a real struggle in the West right now to develop discernment, to be able to say, I'm not going to join the right or the left. I'm actually going to go and study. I'm going to allow myself to pull my brain out of what my brain's expected to think, but actually really, really think. What are those lessons that you had from your childhood that you think helped inoculate you, as I say, against these bad ideas?
Real world experience. I mean, the only thing communism is good for is solving America's obesity problem. If you institute it, everyone's going to be poor and starving, and that'd be great. But that real world experience, I think what it really taught me, the stories of my family, my grandmother being born in a gulag, all of it, is that the reason ideas like communism and radical socialism don't work is that, well, there are many reasons, but one of them is, and one of the reasons that it should be resisted at all costs, is that in that sort of system, because what you're doing is you're taking away from the productive people to give to the unproductive people, that necessarily requires a high level of tyranny, because productive people don't want to give away the things that they've generated to people who haven't, right? And so, first and foremost, it's a system that is dependent on authoritarianism. And so if you oppose authoritarianism, it doesn't really matter whether you oppose communism or not, because those are inseparable. You cannot have a radically quote unquote progressive society without a radical level of authoritarianism and tyranny. It's not possible, because the idea is so contrary to human nature, you have to use a lot of force to put it in place. But to your broader point about, not falling into the trap of polarizing your own brain, look, I think it's a natural consequence of the fact that ultimately every 4 years at an election, you either pull this lever or that lever. And it may be the case, by the way, that, even as an independent thinker, every 4 years or, for a period of your life, you pull the same lever. But that's not the same as believing every single thing that people who pull the same lever say. And I think the reason I feel that is when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, this won't mean much to the audience, but when I came here, I had a jacket on. On the inside, it's got a face of the comedian Bill Hicks, which is something someone made for me. It's a great hero of mine. And I have another one with George Carlin, who was another comedian. Comedians 20, 30 years ago in this country in particular, they were pushing back against the authoritarians of their day. And the authoritarians of their day was the religious, conservative, Christian right. These were the people who were saying, you can't make that joke, you can't talk about this, you can't. Monty Python, for example, their show was very controversial because Christians were upset about it. I am not, there's this idea now that, the left is authoritarian and the right loves freedom. The right loves freedom when they're not in cultural power, right? Let's be honest about that. I don't think either side is naturally inclined towards maximum freedom, especially for people that they don't agree with. And so there have to be people who hold that line, who say, actually, the principle is more important than the tribe, And that's why I'm very happy to be speaking with people on the right and the left. Right now, most of the people that want to hear from me are on the right, because they're the ones that feel that their ideas are not being given an equal playing field or a level playing field. Their ideas are being oppressed, suppressed, whatever the word is. And I think they're right. I think that's absolutely true. I think there's been a tremendous amount of, the tolerant people being extraordinarily intolerant. And I think the place we're in terms of all the polarization that we're seeing is largely a product of that, a product of people who are divorced from the reality of their fellow man, the reality that while for them, their particular experience of globalization or their particular experience of immigration or their particular experience of all these things that are happening in society, they've got a French au pair or whatever, they think of that as immigration. Whereas if you are an electrician, your experience of immigration in the UK is you can't buy a house, you can't have kids, and your wages are plummeting in real terms. But my concern is the people who have they have the control of the mechanisms by which we communicate. They're the chattering classes, as we call them in the UK. They don't have any interests in the experience of other people, as I didn't when I was surprised by Brexit. And I just thought that was a real, we like to say nowadays, teachable moment for me. And I took it upon myself to teach myself some things. And so I sought out people who I didn't agree with, people that I used to, you're evil. I remember listening to, after the 2016 election here, after Donald Trump got elected, I watched every single interview that Steve Bannon did. And I hated Steve Bannon with a passion. But I watched every single thing that he did because I thought, here's a smart guy who helped to get this guy elected. I'm guessing it's possible that this guy knows something I don't. And that, I think, is the healthier reaction, which we did not see from our media, from our corporate organizations, from academic institutions, from a lot of people in that space. Their reaction was not, what have I done wrong and how have I ended up in this place where what I think does not match reality? Because that's really, the truth is, what is the point of the truth? The point of the truth is to be able to predict the future effectively, right? Mm-hmm. Is to say, if I do this, right? If I move this book, it's going to fall off. That's gravity, we know, right? If I do whatever, that's the point of finding out what the truth is. If your ideas about reality are continually proven to be incorrect and you double down instead of trying to learn, what does that say about you? Well, what it says is you're not interested in the truth. You're interested in your own self-delusion.
Well, that takes a lot of humility to be able to say that, right? Even to watch Steve Bannon's show or watch PragerU, God forbid, right? I have found that when people who are diehard leftists, and maybe that's where you were a few years ago, maybe not, maybe you're a classical liberal who's actually just willing to hear what another person has to say. When they watch the content, they're not looking to hear the perspective of the other side. They're just looking to find the one word that confirms their bias so they can go ahead and attack rather than really gain some sort of understanding. And there's a huge difference between those two, actions.
Yeah. And I think we're all capable of that perceptual self-delusion, which is why I think orientating yourself towards the pursuit of truth is the right way to go. And that means that maybe 20 years from now, I'm going to be sitting on a left-leaning show and people in the right-wing space are going to think I'm a, whatever the terms now, the libtard, cuck, whatever, like everyone has these, right? I'm happy with that. I never thought that, when it comes to politics is a tribal game. I understand that. But I'm actually less interested in politics than I am in the space of ideas. And in the space of ideas, you can either have an allegiance to the truth or you can have an allegiance to ideology. And when you have an allegiance to ideology, you're going to go further away from the truth.